Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today my guest is Esalen's artist-in-residence for spring 2021, Darnell Walker. Darnell is a writer and creator of children's media, as well as a powerful documentary filmmaker. His efforts include 2015's Seeking Asylum, which explored Black Americans' desires to escape American tyranny and widespread police violence for safer lands. He's made work that investigates mental health, sexual violence, education, and revolution. Together we explored his body of work, modes of creativity, and the kind of change he hopes to effect in the world. But before we get into our conversation, are you looking for support in navigating the unique challenges that middle age brings when it comes to navigating relationships, career, finances, and health? On June 5th, Modern Elder Academy begins an 8-week online transitions course on navigating profound life changes in middle age and beyond. You'll be part of a small, Esalen-only cohort learning from home, doing one-on-one calls with other group members, and tapping into Modern Elder Academy's pool of thought leaders. Learn more at modernelderacademy.com and use the coupon code Esalen when you enroll to save 10%. Now, here's my conversation with Darnell Walker. So, Darnell, you're Esalen's artist-in-residence in the spring of 2021, and you're kind of what I'd call a Renaissance man.
Maybe. I don't know.
But
I'll take it.
I say that because you create a lot of disparate forms of art, and your creativity is kind of varied. And what I want to do over the course of the interview is try to touch upon a lot of them and maybe draw some strands and parallels between the work that you're doing and kind of try to figure out where it comes from.
Okay. Sounds good.
So right now you're creating children's media. That was the first thing that I found out about you. So maybe we can begin there.
That's a good place to start. I'm a writer for children's television, children's media. I do podcasts as well. Working on a short animated film, and I've written a few children's books. I wrote the children's book. Maybe I have two now, but the first one, I guess about 7 years ago. That kind of led me in this direction. I was like, oh, maybe we should look more into children, especially with, I believe that representation matters and having things out there for kids. Like the first book I wrote was about a kid who was going to lose his sight eventually. And so talking about disabilities in children and all of that was important. And then that turned into a script one day, many years later, 4 years later, and that turned into a fellowship and led me into children's television.
Well, tell me about why did you choose to focus on a child who would lose his sight?
Originally, it was because I had a fear of losing my sight, and not that it was ever a threat or anything that I thought would happen. It was just, for some reason, I always had this thought, like, if I went blind, I don't think I'd be able to handle that. And then I went to an exhibit called Dialogue in the Dark. I was in Atlanta once, and it was basically like they take you into this completely pitch black, these spaces, 4 spaces. One's a busy street corner, one's a restaurant, one's a bedroom, and one is a grocery store. And they give you a guide who's actually blind, and you all get a cane, and you have to figure out how to navigate these spaces. And so I did that. And when I came out, I was like, I made it. It wasn't as bad as I thought. I think I'd be fine. I don't want to lose my sight, but I think I'd be fine if it ever happened. And then this book just came to me from that experience. I was like, I want to have a kid who, and I travel a lot. And so I created this book about this kid who wants to be a pilot and see all the beautiful things in the world. And he finds out he's going to lose his sight, and it may not happen. But his mom takes him on a trip around the world to see all those things. Yeah, so I combined like all of these things that I had going through my head at the time. And it just came out as this book.
Do you have children?
I have one. I have a 16-year-old.
Okay. So you have experience with the children's media platform.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, watching the things he watched growing up and finding shows that I enjoyed that I wanted to give to him. And, but it's much different. Like the shows I watched as a kid could never be reproduced now, some of the Tom and Jerry and Roadrunner and things like that we could never do now for children. But being able to share those and being able to see what he was watching and what he was into and his friends was great. And so coming into where I am now, into a children's space with podcasts and television, it's kind of like, I watched that. I've seen that. Yeah, I think I could do a couple episodes of that. We'll see.
Talk to me a little bit about the work that you do with podcasts and television, if you will.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So with podcasts, I write for a team called Tinkercast, which is great. It's it's the number one children's, they produce the number one children's podcast called Wow in the World. I write for their show, Two What's in the Wow, which is a kids game show. It's a scientific based game show that's pretty amazing. We basically set up kids to come on and figure out which of the three scientific quote unquote facts is the true fact. And then and it's a great show for kids who 2 and up, or who knows, like very, very young. I enjoy it as an adult. Like before getting the opportunity to write, I would listen to all the episodes and I'm like, huh. And me and my friends would have fun trying to figure out which one was the true wow. So I do that. With shows, I'm part of the Blues Clues writing team. Blues Clues and You comes on Nickelodeon through the company 9 Story that I work for. Written for a few other shows, one called Karma's World that's coming to Netflix pretty soon. And so it's great, and always looking for more opportunities and trying to get that stuff out there. I came through the Sesame Street writing room, and there we were basically creating our own original content, so also trying to do that at the same time.
Oh, actually, bring me back to the Sesame Street. I think when we spoke before, you told me about you had received a fellowship from Sesame Street.
Absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, it was crazy. I was living in South Africa at the time, and as a writer, as a television writer, you apply to fellowships like every year. Everyone has one, and it's like, okay, and it becomes exhausting. And so a friend says, hey, you should apply to the Sesame Street one. Maybe this is for you. And I'm thinking, probably, I don't know. I've never thought about children's stuff, but it can't hurt to apply. All they can only say no. And so I did. I applied and expected a no. Got an interview. The interview was, I thought it was awful. Like I was traveling at the time. I was in Portugal. It was a national holiday in Portugal. The Wi-Fi was down where I was staying. The restaurants were closed. I found a burger joint that had Aretha Franklin playing like loud, and I had to stand outside with the wind blowing and doing this interview. And they called me a week later, and I was accepted into the program. Moved back to the States for that. It was just like, it was like day one of those things where you get in there and you realize that this is where you should have been all along. And wow. I was like, I should have been in kids media years ago.
That is so interesting with the other information that I know about your work, because I've watched these documentaries that you've created, and they're not kids material at all.
Not at all.
At all. So let's talk a little bit about your documentary work and kind of weave back to the children's work as well.
For sure. Yeah.
Maybe you could start off with the first one that you created.
Okay. Yeah. So the first one was Seeking Asylum from 2015. It was April. I remember Freddie Gray had just been killed in Baltimore. And I had a trip planned to Europe already. Like, it wasn't a thing that I planned out to make a film. It was like, I'm going to Europe and I'm going to this festival in Amsterdam to just party, dance, and tour around.
What was the festival?
It was called King's Day. So it's the King's birthday, April 27th every year. That was the plan. And I was landing first, though, in Oslo in Norway. And so I'm telling a friend about the trip. I was like, I'm going to Norway first, then I'm going to London, and then to Amsterdam. And he's like, you going to Oslo? What are you going to seek asylum over there after what just happened to Freddie Gray? And I'm like, it's not a bad idea. But then I said,
because you found the situation in the United States untenable?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The U.S., at that time, this is 2015, but still today, like, it was, everything is repeating itself. Everything's still, the same things are still happening. But it hadn't been a thought before that. Like, and when he said it, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? But so I grabbed my camera and I just went through Europe, and whenever, anytime anyone wanted to talk, I just had the camera. It's like, oh, can I talk to you on camera? Not to make a film, but just to have footage to bring back to the States and say, this is how the world sees what's happening over here.
In terms of police
in terms of
violence.
Like police, violence against black folks in the U.S. By police, because I know like we weren't getting that message here. Like no one knew what the world was thinking. Like there was no news unless you had friends somewhere, and I had traveled enough to know that the world wasn't silent while we were being treated this way. And so that's what I wanted to do, and because the year before, not even a full year, but the year before was Mike Brown in Ferguson, and I was there in the streets for that. And so I was there just filming and putting things on YouTube for people back home to watch because the news wasn't telling the full truth. And so I shoot all this footage, and I get back from Europe, and a friend says, wow, you have like 100 hours of footage. You should maybe put something together, make a film. I'm like, maybe. I don't know much about editing. Yeah, I'll see. And then, so I paid him like $100 to teach me for like one day of editing. I was like, could you edit? He's like, I'll charge $100 a day. I was like, I have $100. I'm going to give you one day. And so I just sat there and watched him like cut and add and cut and add. And so then the rest of the time I did it myself, learned how to put music to it. And then I just put it out there. And someone said, submit it to festivals. So I did. And I remember someone said, oh, you're a documentary filmmaker. I was like, oh, I guess so, maybe. And it started getting accepted to festivals around the world. That's how I ended up in South Africa. And it became a thing. Like, I'm actually still touring with it. It's 6 years later. People are still talking about it. And it's great, mostly because of the content, of course, and it's still very relevant.
Did you end up finding asylum in a sense?
I did not officially, no. Because when I got to Europe, it was so strange. There was a protest in Oslo. I think at the time there was an Ethiopian genocide. And so that was the protest that was happening in Oslo. And talking to folks in Oslo, they were like, yeah, no, we don't. And so the film, I asked one guy, I'm like, if black people want, and he was a black guy, I was like, if black people wanted to come here because we didn't feel safe in the U.S., would you welcome us with open arms? He's like, no. And I'm like, okay. He was the only one that thought that. He was the only one that had that opinion, to be fair. Like, everyone else was like, absolutely, Oslo welcomes you. Oslo's a beautiful place. I've had an amazing experience here. I got to London. London was also protesting the death of Freddie Gray at the time. I didn't know that protest was even happening. I was walking to get food and ran into an amazing young woman. And she's like, oh, yeah, I'm down here. Are you here for the protest? I'm like, oh, what protest? She's like, the Freddie Gray protest is about to happen in about 10 minutes. And so I'm standing there like, oh. And so I had my camera ready, and that was happening there. And London's had a history also of racism and things like that. So, and I knew that London wasn't where I wanted to be, or the UK isn't where I wanted to be. Amsterdam was high on my list, but I got to Amsterdam and we were in McDonald's getting food. And the police storm it. Like, I don't know what happened. Like, I mean, it happened in the blink of an eye. Everything was calm, and then you see the manager of the McDonald's pick up a black kid, and throw him outside, and the police, maybe 20 of them, swarm him, and then they open up, and the kid's gone, and no one knows where he went. And I'm like, what's going on? And one of the black kids says, oh, this happens all the time. They'll release him in the morning. It'll be fine. And I'm like, what? And then I start talking. I'm making friends there. And we're talking about the Netherlands, history of racism. And I ended up fighting for a few years. And still, because they have around Christmas time, they have like Zwarte Piet, Black Pete, which is like a very racist caricature, like blackface. Everyone puts blackface on, and it's crazy. And I'm like, okay, Amsterdam might not be the place either. And eventually I ended up in South Africa because of this film. And I was like, this is where I need to stay. And I stayed in South Africa for a few years.
When you told me that you had ended up in South Africa, that of course was kind of surprising to me because I don't know that much about South Africa, but I do know about the history of apartheid there. So can you tell me about kind of the climate racially in South Africa when you landed?
Absolutely. Yeah. And South Africa it's a strange, complex country. I got there. I was there for maybe 15 minutes, and I was like, I have to live here. I didn't know what it was. It was the vibe. I didn't know much about the country. It wasn't on my immediate list of places to travel. I knew about apartheid, like I'd seen all the documentaries, read all the books, knew it well. And I get there and I'm like, this place is beautiful. It's amazing. I feel great. I feel welcomed here. And so I stayed, but being there, I landed at the time when they had the Fees Must Fall movement going on, where black students were protesting the fees of university because it's like we were oppressed until literally 20 years ago, and we have to pay the same amount as the white students pay here. Like that whole thing, apart, like being there, I got there 2016, so 22 years after apartheid or so, officially ended anyway, I'll say. It kind of it felt like the opportunity to see what America was like coming out of Jim Crow, except with technology. It's like, oh, if we had Instagram, Facebook, and all this in the 60s, 70s, this is what this would have felt like.
Did you note a climate of like racially charged police violence in South Africa?
I did not, and it was absolutely one of the questions I asked when I got to. I was in Johannesburg, and the climate in Johannesburg is a lot different than Cape Town. So Johannesburg now is kind of in this place where so many movements are taking place, a lot of progress is being made, conversations are happening, change is happening. And the conversations are amazing. Like, you meet amazing people who are doing a lot of the work on the ground to make positive change in the country. Cape Town feels like no one, it's like, I know people there are fighting. I have amazing friends, but it also feels like racism will be here for a long time. And so anytime I go to Cape Town, I have a hard time. I didn't experience any police or witness any police violence. Harassment, yes. But I don't think I even seen a white police officer in South Africa. And so it didn't even, like, the feeling was different. Like when I'm in the U.S., even in Amsterdam, I remember being in Amsterdam, walking down the street, and a cop taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and he's like, "Oh, watch out, the train's coming." And I move out of the way, and then I realized, like, 5 minutes later, I was like, I wasn't even nervous when I turned around and saw that it was a police officer. But I'm in the U.S., and I'm riding down the highway, and a cop can pull up behind me, and instantly I'm like, oh, do I have my license on me? I might die. Like, it's an instant feeling.
And you were a victim of police violence. I read on just doing some internet research on you when you were younger, right?
When I was a kid, the first time I was stopped by a cop, I was, I don't even know, maybe like somewhere between like 8 and 10, and playing tag with my cousin in the park. And they just stopped me and held me for 30 minutes, an hour, just asking me questions like, where do you live? Who do you stay with? Why are you running from us? I'm like, I'm not running. I'm playing tag with my cousin who's right there. And they're like, no, you're running. And it was this whole thing. So, and then every experience I had with a cop after that, it was like, I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia. So, which no one knew about until 2017 when, the tiki torches and the Klan and all that. But I had this conversation yesterday. Charlottesville is one of those places, like, so when 2017 happened, you were able to see like two Charlottesvilles. It was like the one Charlottesville where people were hashtagging, this is not my Charlottesville, this doesn't happen. And the black people in Charlottesville were saying, no, this is exactly what Charlottesville is. And we're just glad that you all get to see it now. So people are like, were you fighting? Were you part of that? It was like, and my family's like, no, because this is always what happens. This is what we always see. And so every experience, I would ride my bike through the university. I would get stopped by police so they can check the serial number on my bike. This always happened. I went to school undergrad in Daytona Beach, and which is probably the most racist place I've ever been in my life. But my school was amazing. But I had an incident where me and a friend, I was held on the ground with a gun to my head, and my friend had a gun on her head by another cop, and they're telling us like, oh, we think your car is stolen. Someone said it was stolen. And we're like, who? And they're like, someone around the corner said it was stolen. And we're like, what? And so we're scared. And then he looks at her registration and he's like, sorry about that. You guys have a good day. And so like these things kept happening. I think I may have had one great situation with the cop where I was driving. I got pulled over and my license was in the trunk and my tag was expired. And he's like, don't worry about it. It's fine. And I'm sitting there like, oh, I thought that was going to go completely different. But every situation has been the same. So when it was time to go for me, it was time to go. But I just keep sitting. So when I got to South Africa and I got to Amsterdam and London and any other country where I've had not run-ins with the police, but I've come in with encounters with police, it's been, I didn't fear for my life. I didn't have any feelings whatsoever. It was like, oh, this is a person. But I come back to the States and it's like, oh, this could be the last day that I'm here.
It's really powerful to hear your story and to also consider the fact that you made this film in, was it 2015 or 16?
15. Mm-hmm.
And the situation hasn't gotten better; it's gotten worse, and likely. I mean, what does that feel like for you to have created this powerful piece of media and brought awareness to the subject, and then to see the same situation kind of replaying itself over and over?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I've had the conversation with friends, family about, I always say, like, people, you hear people say like history repeats itself. And I'm like, yes, but also it's not really history if it never changed. Like, it's always been the present. It's always been currently happening. And so when I created it, I knew that it wasn't going to, I mean, you hope that it's going to change something, but it's like, it probably won't change anything. But I also want people to see it and say, oh, I can leave this place and go elsewhere. Like every question, every Q&A that I've had at film festivals for this, it's always, I always get the question like, what, or the statement, it's like, well, everywhere is racist. There's racism everywhere. And I'm like, yes, racism does exist everywhere, but there are places you can go where you can feel safe. You can feel like if I get stopped by a cop, I don't fear that I'm going to lose my life. If like whatever that racism is, I don't fear like it's not going to affect how I live. It's not I don't have to deal with it every day. Here, it's like it's just there. And so so now I look at it and I'm like, oh, I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm glad this film has created this conversation. I wish it could have done more than create conversation, and maybe one day it will, but everyone can't go. But if you have the opportunity to go somewhere where you feel safe for your kids. And then it's the whole thing of, well, if I, like in the film, my friend, she asked, she's like, well, if we leave, are we giving up? And I'm like, sometimes you just have to say, you know what? I'm not fighting for this anymore. I'm out. Like she's like, where our ancestors, they fought. And I was like, well, they didn't have a choice. They didn't have the choice to leave. We can go. And if it means, our kids are safer, we're in better communities, our mental health is so much better, then why aren't we leaving? And that's what I wanted to start that conversation.
Well, talk to me about mental health, because I believe the next film that you made was outside the house. Yeah.
So I made, each of my films actually kind of was a spinoff sort of the film before that. Yeah. And so with Seeking Asylum, there were so many things in the film about how racism affects our mental health, and how there hasn't been a time in of Black people being in the U.S. that we haven't been without at least stress and anxiety. And so I'm like, that's something we don't talk about. Let's talk about that. And so one day I put on Facebook and I said, if you have gone to a therapist or sought mental health assistance, what made you go? And I had a few friends, like it was silent for like an hour. No one wanted to say anything. And then finally someone said, I thought I was going to kill myself. I think that was the first message. And it was like, I thought I was going to kill myself one night and I needed someone to talk to. From there, it was like the floodgate just opened. Everyone was like, oh, I thought I was alone. Oh my gosh. And you would see someone post something that's like completely vulnerable and honest. And then someone would comment under that, like, I never knew someone else felt the same way that I felt about this. Wow. And I see people like reaching out saying, oh, who's your therapist? I would love to talk to them. Maybe you can refer someone, And I've never seen this among Black people. It was like, we don't talk about mental health, and I wanted to talk about it. I was like, well, this is what we need to talk about. So if any of you on this post want to have a conversation, I will fly to where you are, or you can come to me, or we can get on Skype. But I want to talk to you. And people just reached out and said, I would love to talk to you. I've never shared this story with anyone, but I'll talk to you. And it's crazy. Like, I have people in the film who are telling these stories, and they're like, wow, I didn't think I was going to even talk about this, but it's just coming out. I haven't even told my mom.
I was almost
Gosh, what if she sees this?
I'm like, kind of a therapy itself to participate in the
to just get it out
with you.
Absolutely. And it's crazy. Like, I'm not a therapist, didn't go to school for it. And so I would always tell them, like, listen, I'm not I'm not a therapist. But I had therapists writing me saying, listen, if any of the people who are participating want to talk, I'm here to help. And so I built up like this amazing network of therapists that I can now refer people to in organizations. And what's strange about it is that, so when I finished the film, I was living in South Africa at the time, and it became so heavy. It was already 6 months past like the date that I promised I would have it complete. But I'd done so many interviews, and it was just, I just couldn't finish it. I just could not. And I got food poisoned, and I'm sitting there and I was like, I can't leave the house. I guess I should just finish this film. And so I finished the film. I remember at night, and I said, I'm going to put it up for 12 hours on Vimeo and YouTube and on this webpage, and then just send out the link. Whoever watches it in 12 hours will see it. And I'll take it down and submit it to festivals. And I put it up. I woke up the next morning. I mean, my inbox was like flooded with messages like, please don't take this down. Like, you literally saved my life. Like, I didn't know what I was going to do last night. So many messages. And I was like, I got to leave it up. And from there, I started getting calls from psychology departments at universities. And I've been to universities to talk to psychologists to teach them how to talk to Black people about therapy. And it's like, I have to tell them every time, like, I'm not an expert. They're like, but you are.
What do you say?
Because you've talked to these people. I'm like, it starts with trust. Like, it's all about, because so many times what happens is, like you graduate, and people who aren't in the community, just non-Black people, and even some Black therapists too, they come into communities and they say, this is what we're offering, this is what you need from us. And it's like, no, you didn't ask us what we needed. We could have told you we didn't need this. It's like this story I heard from a great friend of mine. Like, there's a community in maybe Hawaii where it's like a poorer community, and some folks went up there and they were like, oh, they need a car. If they had a car, they can get around. So they bought them a car, and they came back a year later, and like trees had grown around it and bushes and all this stuff. They're like, what? You didn't use the car? They're like, yeah, we didn't tell you we needed the car. We needed whatever, and it's like, no, ask us what we need, build the trust. Don't come in and just try to start something. It takes a while. You got to have patience. We already don't trust the healthcare system much because of the history that we've gone through with the healthcare system. And it's like, so you have to build that trust up, and then we'll decide if we're going to talk to you.
And how do you create trust with the people that you interview? How is it that you get people to open up to you in order to create these documentaries that change people's lives?
I have no idea. I think I'm just, a lot of the people have followed me on social media. They know someone I know. And they just reach out and say, I trust, like, I carry myself in such a way, like, I don't judge, and I don't have anything out there where people would see it and say, oh, I don't think I trust him with this. So many people who say, I'm here to talk. If you want to talk about your mental health, I'm here for you. But then they'll have a post about their crazy cousin so-and-so. And it's like, yeah, but you can't do that, And it's not that I do it intentionally. It's just how I live. And I think that people see it, and I've never really questioned it. I just accept it and say, yeah, I would love to talk to you if you want to come and talk. And they just come in and just start sharing. And I'm like, I'm glad you did that.
A thread that I see in going through your work is this desire for people to kind of open up and unload in an honest way. I mean, specifically Black people. Mm-hmm. Do you have a belief that Black people's stories are largely untold in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, absolutely. I remember a few years ago watching, I think it was the Academy Awards, or it was an award ceremony, and Viola Davis, who's amazing, and she's doing an acceptance speech, and she's like, there are stories in those graveyards out there, There's so many stories that weren't told. And I'm like, yes, there's so many. Because we didn't know how to share them. We didn't know where to share them. We didn't know how to be vulnerable. We didn't want to put the weight of whatever this stuff was on someone else. We didn't want to be a burden. Like, for many, many reasons they weren't shared, like even trying to talk to my parents or my aunts and uncles, my grandmother, it was tough. It's like, I remember finding a marriage certificate of my great-grandparents, and I told my grandma, I was like, oh, I really want to research the family. And she's like, don't go looking into anything until I die. And I'm like, well, what's the story there? Like there's stories, but there's shame around some things, and there's so much. It's like, why we can't really get great stories of Black musicians. It's like, someone wants to tell the story or authors or anything, and then the family's like, no, we don't want to tell that story. I've been trying to tell a story about James Baldwin for years, me and a friend, and we can't find a producer because we can't find a Black producer because they're like, I don't know if we should tell that story. Guess we got to keep looking for a producer because I'm going to tell this story. And so it's so many stories out there, and they're not being told for whatever reason. And that's what I'm trying to do. Like, I actually just started an obituary project because I think that so many people are dying who have, who are like libraries. Like, they're literally libraries of these people are. And we don't get those stories from them. And so it's like, you get like a 2-sentence obituary, and it's like, oh, they had these kids and they died, and this is the funeral. And it's like, but what happened? You read like New York Times obituaries, and it's like, this person lived, and I'm like, we have this.
Yeah.
These people, I've sat with some of these people, and I've heard the most amazing stories. Like my grandfather, who had a story like every day, and I'm like, these stories exist. Why aren't we telling them? Like, when they die, they should exist somewhere. And so I'm just trying to do that too. So it's like, yeah.
So what form would that project take?
It's going to be written. I actually just started while I was here at Esalen. I thought about it for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And I was sitting in the yurt, and I'm like, you know what? Now's the perfect time. Like, it just came to me. And I'm like, yeah. So I went on again to social media and to some people I knew. I was like, hey, if anyone died in your family, whenever, and you felt like the obituary wasn't what it should have been, and that they have stories, reach out to me. I want to tell them. I sent them a questionnaire to fill out. And so I'm writing these things out and sending it to them saying, here's the story of your mother or your uncle. And they're like, oh my God, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, because they're like, yeah, they died and we have nothing. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, but you have the stories in there. They told you, and between the 5 of you, you could put pieces of their life together, but maybe it should exist somewhere else. And so writing it out, trying to figure out what to do with it after that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so far it's just a thought. So it's all coming together.
Well, you also have an interest in death from a different perspective, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about this goal you have of becoming a death doula.
Yeah. Like it's such a personal thing. I think death is it's like the one thing we own, the one thing that's going to happen. We're all headed that way, and I would rather people not be alone when it happens. I don't want people to be afraid of it. And I also think that there's even when you're dying, there's still life that's happening. And so I want to be there for those who have no one, who are afraid or who want to tell those stories, and somehow get those stories out. It's been something like I didn't know what a death doula was until just a couple of years ago, but what a death doula does is something I've been thinking about for years. So like, at least since 2014, and it just came to me. And
tell me a little bit more about it, because it's not something that everybody would do. I mean, myself, when I think about becoming a death doula, it's just like, no, that's, and I'm into some pretty intense stuff, but that's way too intense for me.
Yeah.
What is it about you that you feel you can hold that, and that kind of environment can be something that you can exist in?
Yeah. And, I honestly, I don't know. It's just, I've been around people who are dying. I remember I had a cousin in 94 who died from AIDS-related complications in the 90s, when people were still like very ignorant to what it was. They didn't want to come around. Most of the family didn't want to come around. And it was really me and my grandmother was like, you can come and stay with me. And, you're my nephew, whatever. So he comes and he stays with her. My mom's like, yeah, you can go up there. My mother had already taken care of one cousin who died. And so I'm up there, and it wasn't a, you're dying thing. It was like, oh, tell me about, how was Kentucky and how was this? And looking back, I think that was the first instance I had with someone who was act like he came home to die. He knew it was a matter of weeks maybe. And he's like, I want to come back to Virginia. That's the first time looking back, I remember being around it. And it was never a thing of, this weight, this heaviness. It was always, I want to make sure that your last couple of weeks you feel loved in this thing. And then, my grandfather who died a few years ago, being there with him in the end and just having those conversations like, okay, so when you die, who do you want to do the eulogy? And you're having these conversations, and everyone else is coming in like, they give it the look, the head, turn their head to the side. And sometimes people don't look at you or they treat you like the dying person. I think these people saw me as, oh, yeah. And so it was just, we would literally just sit in there and laugh and have conversations up until the end, and I'm like, huh. So I don't know what that is, but I think like holding space. It's all about holding space in a very non-judgmental way. And a lot of the things that I've experienced in life have led me to do that in the end for people.
It seems too that you're bringing your creative spirit to places that a lot of people can't bring creativity to.
Yeah, like it's hard to see it. Like I ended up writing my granddad was like, oh, I want you to do the eulogy. We're the only two smart people in this family. I'm like, yeah, it's probably true. And so it was great. It was great to be able to do that. And I do enjoy it. And it's crazy because now like a few friends know. And even before I haven't even officially announced that I was even doing this. I was waiting to finish the certificate, at least with my friends. But I do talk about death a lot on Facebook, on social media, whatever. And most of my friends are like, if I die before you, you have to do the eulogy at my funeral. And I'm like, yeah, I got you. Yeah. And I know they're telling the truth. They're like, yeah, I really need you to do it. I'm like, yeah. Because me, I'm like, I think I saw there was an app like a year ago I used to have. And it reminds you like twice a day that you're going to die. Like it either sends you like a death quote or something, but it's like the study that was done that if you're reminded of your death, you live a better life. Uh-huh. And so I'm always on Facebook like, don't forget, you're going to die. And so people are like, are you crazy? And people are journaling more and leaving like records and all this stuff. And it's great. It's great to see.
Yeah, it's amazing that you're able to, I don't know, shepherd in the difficult conversations, but with a spirit of kind of like openness and honesty. So there's a positivity to it. There's another film that you made about rape and sexual violence is your most recent documentary. Yeah. Would you mind speaking about that?
Yeah. So like I said, excuse me, most of the films came from the film before. And so when doing the mental health film, I learned that a lot of the folks I spoke with in the film, their mental health journey or mental illness journey started with sexual assault. And it was, again, one of those questions like, why haven't we talked about that? I don't even know what the beginning of that film was. Like that film, because the mental health film got dark. Like I said, I was 6 months past the due date. The rape and sexual assault one, I don't know what the beginning was really, but I do remember I was living in South Africa at the time, and I was helping a friend at their bar. And my neighbor, I lived in this neighborhood that was, you would compare it to like Soho in New York or something. And all the artists were there, the restaurants, the bars. But it was a very well-defined border. It was like we had security all through the neighborhood, but literally at the border, you could be across the street. And if anything happened across the street, security was like, that has nothing to do with us. I'm not going to get involved. And I was walking from the bar, and the bar was 2 blocks outside of the border. I'm walking by, and this woman is laying on the ground, and she's just laying there. And she was still, and I'm like, oh God, is she dead? And I stand there for like 5 minutes, just like staying. I didn't want to touch her. People are like selling fruit. People are walking by. No one's doing it. Like, I'm the only person that sees her. But it's like clear as day. And I'm like, what's going on? And this other woman stops, and I tell her, I was like, I didn't want to touch her because I don't know if I can or what. And the woman kind of like moves her a little bit, and the woman kind of moves in pain. And then you see like blood, like just pouring out of somewhere. And then I look, and there's like a blood trail. And it goes all the way back by the bar where I just come from. We call the police, call the ambulance, and they come. And again, it's 30, 40 people just walking by like nothing's happening. I go back to the bar, and I was like, hey, it's a woman around the corner. She's been stabbed. And I don't know. And they were like, oh, yeah. You know, I think she was just a prostitute, so we didn't say nothing. And I'm like, what? No, it doesn't matter. You should have, why didn't you call the, you know, and it was just a thing. And I'm like, okay. And I remember thinking like, and I don't know if the film was a thought at that time, but I was like, something has to be done about this. And I wrote an article about it, and then things just started coming out. I interviewed a couple of organizations in South Africa. I interviewed some people in South Africa as well. And then I said, okay, well, I got to go to London. Let me talk to some people there. I got to the States, interviewed some people here. And it just, again, it kept picking up, and I was getting more and more survivors coming forward and saying, I would love to have a conversation with you and talk about it. People who had never opened up before. And, you know, I remember going to a presentation, a workshop about the mental health film. And during the question and answer, someone's like, oh, are you working on anything else? And I'm like, oh, I'm working on a film about rape and sexual assault. You know, it's coming along, whatever. And I come down, and I'm on my way to the restroom, and this woman's like, she gave me her card. And I'm like, okay. And it was a friend's mom, guy I grew up with. And she gives me her card. She's like, oh, you know, I'd love to give you some information about it. I work at so-and-so. I'm thinking, okay, as a professional. And I turned the card over, and she wrote like a long note. It's like, I was assaulted when I was in college. I would love to talk about it. I'd never talk about it. And I'm like, I've known you. I know you, you know? And it was just heavy. And I was like, I have to tell this story. And I saw what it was doing for survivors to just come forward and talk to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we got to get the stories out there. And that's what happened. We got the stories out. And again, just like the mental health film, people were writing, men and women both came to talk in the film, which surprises a lot of people. They were like, you had guys speaking? I'm like, yeah, guys came forward. And you know, it's strange. I remember we had one guy in the film who didn't realize he was assaulted. He came to talk about how he supports the friends who've come to him to say that they've been assaulted, the women that have come to him. And while he's talking, his friend that he's with, who's a woman, she's like, well, tell Darnell about the time you were assaulted. And he's like, I was never assaulted. And she's like, yeah, we were in the car and you were telling me that story. And he was like, that wasn't assault. You know, yeah, I was drunk and passed out, and she just got on top. And as he's telling the story, he's realizing that it's happened to him. And he's sitting there like, oh. So then through this film, so many people realize like, that's happened to me. I didn't think, but I guess it is. And so we were able to have those conversations as well. And it was like what so many people thought was gray area or wasn't what it was. And it was just heavy. You know, we did a screening in Michigan, and I had a father watching it, and he's a cop, and the mother is a rape and sexual assault trauma psychiatrist, and I can't watch the film anymore, so I usually just leave the room and sit in the hallway. So he comes out and he's like, yeah, it's a good film, I just got to come out. And then he just breaks down and just telling the story about his 6-year-old daughter who was assaulted. And he's like, my wife works in this, and I'm a police officer, and it's happened to us, and it happened in my home. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. You know, we have to end, like, how do we end it? And then 2, it's like, I'm glad we're having these conversations and people are being vulnerable and sharing their stories. And so that's why it was important to get those stories out with that film.
Is it difficult for you to carry the weight of, I mean, none of these films are easy subjects.
Mm-hmm. No, it's not difficult. I think it becomes, in the beginning it was, because like I said, I was a mental health advocate, but I wasn't like in the streets, like giving out cards and referrals or anything. And the same with sexual assault. Like I've always been there for survivors and doing what I can as a friend and whatever to whoever needed it. But so in the beginning, it was hard to, you know, you're trying to think of the right things to say. And it's like, I don't know what to do in this situation. And on the spot, because it's like, but you made this, and I didn't want to be the person that like, but you made this film. What do you mean you don't know what to say? And I'm like, okay, I need to talk. I need to talk to some people. And so they have mental health first aid programs where you go and learn how to hold space for people who are who are in crisis or whatever. Same with rape and sexual assault, working with Title IX organizations at universities, and just organizations, gender justice organizations in South Africa as well. Because it's like, and it changes place to place. Like when I screened it in South Africa, I remember when the film ended, one of the women said, I watched it and when the American woman was talking, I never realized women in America got raped. And I'm like, yes. I'm like, yeah. And I was stuck because I'm like, wow. And you think, like, so many people think it's a very local issue. But also the way a lot of folks in South Africa saw rape was they would talk to me so matter-of-factly. It's like, oh, or even just assault. It was like, oh, I went to the store, I was walking down the street, guy tried to rape me or did rape me, and then I went home, and it's like, what? And so then you're saying you have to figure out how to be in this space and what to say. So yeah.
So looping back to children's media now.
Back to kids television.
I mean, I'm just
yeah.
I'm kind of just in awe of how much you can hold. I'm curious, do you have any specific self-care techniques for keeping your own vitality, your own balance, you're keeping kind of like a groundedness? Yeah,
I journal a lot. Journaling is amazing. I travel often. Travel is like a vice of mine. I used to do, like, until COVID, I was doing, I'd say, a trip every month, like abroad somewhere. I meditate. And friends, I have a great circle of friends who keep me laughing all day, and I can really, we can all just talk. It's like, they're like therapy. It's like I watched the interview with Oprah a couple days ago, and she's talking about Gail, and she was like, the thousands of hours of therapy that I didn't need is because I can talk to her, and I have those friends that I can just be like, hey, this happened today. And they're like, oh, okay. Because it does, like, those like making those films. I mean, I would just finish an interview and it'd be like, all right, I just need to take a break for like a month and do nothing. And then, it becomes easier. And, but yeah, self-care.
And what about being at Esalen for this period of time with the artist in residency program? Is an element of it kind of like utilizing the nature of this place, which is awe-inspiring, to come back to a kind of centeredness or a safety?
Oh, absolutely. This has been like, I can't even express the gratitude I have for this place and the folks who put this program together. Like, being here has been not really even an escape. It's like, because the world still exists and everything that I'm dealing with in the world is still there and but it's just something about this place that definitely brings a lot of things into perspective and into focus. And it's like, the room to breathe. And like, I've meditated a lot here. I've been able to journal a lot here. It's like time moves a little bit slower here for some reason, somehow. Yeah, like, being here has been, and like the goal, I've been like that. I've been able to do all of those things, like handle my real world responsibilities and achieve like all these goals I had set before I got here for being here, and then having to create new goals because I've been able to just get them out, and I don't know how that happened or what this place did to do that. I'm not going to question it. I'm going to accept it and receive it. I don't know what happened. Like, I'll go get lunch and just sit out there. And the other day I pulled out my journal and I was going to journal. And then I just started outlining this novel that I've had in my head for like 4 years. And I'm like, okay, I guess this wants to come out. And so now I'm working on that. And it's just like, you know what? Not questioning. I'm just going to go ahead and receive it and write this book and make that happen.
I feel almost jealous of your creativity because just in the time that we've spoken, you've talked about you're creating for a podcast, creating for a show.
Yeah.
You got several documentaries on your belt. You have an obituary project. You have the new novel that's called on you.
That sounds like a lot. That's oh my gosh. What? I don't know. Oh, that sounds like a lot. Maybe. Oh my God. Yeah, that's crazy. If we're happy, everything else will fall into place. And that's how I feel. And I think that's what I create out of. I think it's, let's start this conversation to go toward healing, to go toward happiness. Let's create this children thing so we can show kids, that they are on television and we can create happier lives for them. And I think it all goes, it's all about happiness for me in the end. No matter if it's the darkest thing or the lightest thing, it's all about happiness and either getting there or staying there, I think.
That's great. Hey, Darnell Walker, can you give us some ways to find out about what you're doing on the internet, ways for listeners to follow you?
Yeah, I need to put it all in one place apparently because that sounds like a lot. But I'm on Instagram at Clever Bastard, spelled just like that, Clever Bastard. Thought about changing that at one point, but I actually like it now. I'm on LinkedIn, Darnell Lamont Walker. I'm Darnell Lamont Walker on Google. I could be found on all social media with that name, Darnell Lamont Walker. Yeah.
What are the names of your films and how can we watch them?
Yeah, so first film is Seeking Asylum. Second film is Outside the House. Third film is Set Yourself on Fire. They're all available on Vimeo and YouTube for free. Yes, the animated short film I'm working on now, it's called Our Song, and I'm hoping to have that out in the coming. Animation takes a while, and so we're just in the beginning stages, but hopefully soon everyone will see that.
Thanks for joining us on Voices of Esalen today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Esalen. This show was produced in conjunction with Michelle McCrary, Terrence Gilby, and Peter Kobabe. Our music is by Nico Holloman. Explore powerful, practical techniques to identify and heal unresolved traumas blocking the energy of the sacred feminine with Esalen Healing Arts Presents, Moon Lodge, honoring the sacred feminine sisterhood, June 18th to June 20th in Big Sur. Holistic Dr. Julie Vaughn and Master Teacher of Buddhist Dharma Lucia Horan will support participants in unlocking rituals to support their empowerment, inner balance, and well-being during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. This workshop is open to all those who identify as women. Learn more at esalen.org/workshops.